Hey, Being at Work community, welcome back to another episode. This is your host, Andrea Butcher. And on this show, we talk so much about organizational culture because it is such an important part, critical part of our being at work. And I've been so fortunate over the last few months to have a front row seat in observing the way in which today's guest is creating culture by design and using the development of leaders at all levels as a catalyst to align leaders around the culture that they're creating. And all of this stems from a pivotal moment in his career that he'll share in this conversation. Noel Bernal is the county manager for Adams County in Colorado. But what you really need to know about Noel is how his why drives everything he does. He has a deep, innate desire to add value and make the lives of others better, which plays out in his day-to-day leadership. So listen in as we talk about a leadership first mindset, investment in me, and the power of sustainable development. So check it out.
If I go back to the very beginning, right, it began with my childhood, coming from a background as a migrant child, migrant as in migrant farm work, and my parents being first generation, and us having that start to our lives here in this country. That really is the foundational, formative piece of what's a big part of who I am. It's developed my why, the environment that I was raised in, the challenges that come from being in that type of lifestyle, and then seeking to take advantage of every opportunity that we can in this country. Those were the types of conversations that I was raised in. My parents, having instilled in us that self-reliant approach, that growth mindset, that we now understand from a leadership perspective. They never allowed us to look at our situation as one that we couldn't overcome to become victims of our situation, but certainly as one where we could learn hard work and then take advantage of opportunities through education and other means to really accomplish whatever we desired. But through that, my why became giving back and helping others, because I saw challenges, I saw injustices and systemic and structural challenges. And for me, that kind of wired me up in a way where I was chomping at the bit from a very young age to begin to make a difference, to be an agent of social change, to take on a career path that I didn't know at the time would be what I do now, but just what is it that I can find that can allow me to serve others and make a positive difference.
Yeah, experience is the best teacher, isn't it? And when you look back at all those early childhood experiences, I can see how they've really shaped your philosophy in the work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important because I was just at a conversation with some folks last Thursday, and part of what I share with them is, you are your greatest asset, and work on yourself before you take on anything else in life. Work on the internal conditions before you take on the external life and world around you, whether that's the workplace or, society at large, or however we decide to make an impact in this world through what only we can do uniquely. And I think a lot of what I was able to experience, that lived experience, became the first qualification, that became the first credential, so to speak, for me as I embarked on this journey and really life of leadership.
Life of leadership. Well, and knowing the story that you're going to share, it feels right for you. I mean, I get a lot of phone calls about leadership development, but a lot of times, the CEO or the leader of the team, whoever I'm talking to, feels like it's really about improving the challenges that he or she is facing. And for you, it was always about culture. From our very first conversation, you were very intentional about the culture that you're creating in Adams County.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, and you're in the front lines. I mean, you talk about being in the front row seat with our journey here. You're in the front lines of the leadership work that's being done across different sectors, right? And different organizations. And I think what you're describing is part of what I think is a challenge. And that is what's feeding the leadership crisis that we have. And that is that leadership is many times viewed from a skewed perspective. For example, leadership is not about us, right? When someone hears for the first time, and I've seen it have an impact in so many different ways. When someone is first told that it's not about you, I've seen individuals process that in different ways. And some folks, it comes across in a very strong way. It almost takes them back because they have perhaps been going through the course of their lives, the course of their careers, with looking at themselves versus having an others focused leadership philosophy. And it throws them for a loop, so to speak, because, oh, wow. And it kind of humbles you, right? It causes you to stop in your tracks and say, wait a minute, maybe I've been doing this wrong. Maybe I've been too focused on me. And what about the rest? What about others? And then leadership sometimes begins to take the shape of, it's the next box we have to check, right? It's just the right thing to do because everyone else is doing it, or it's just the fad, or it's just whatever it might be. But it never, leadership sometimes, it never surprises me how it doesn't always take the role of the entree. It can take the role of a side dish. And it's something that leaders are trying to stuff it in, right? They're trying to figuratively add it to their plates that are already full with tasks and day to day and projects. And then let me see if leadership fits on my plate. Whereas leadership should go first. And then it's how does everything else work around the work of leadership and how do you integrate it so that there isn't this push pull of leadership always being rivaled? And guess what happens? Leadership just falls off the plate far too many times. And to your point, there could be a variety of reasons why a leader might seek to do the work of leadership, but it becomes topical, it becomes one-off-ish, it doesn't get done systematically, it doesn't penetrate the organization, and a lot of that is because the foundation and the lens could be off. And what you're really trying to do is connect with folks at their core. And if you can hire individuals that are mission aligned and or those that are part of your organization who you can begin to connect with at a deeper level, meet them where they are because we're very complex beings as human beings. Meet them where they are, and then how do you direct them and guide them within your organization to allow them to become their full selves? Because similar to how what I just described to you happens to an organization, it happens at the individual level. We get bogged down by the issues of life, and the one person that we neglect in our life is ourselves. There's all this other stuff going on, and we forget to take care of ourselves. And that's also part of the leadership challenge that we need to help folks spend more time with themselves, understand themselves better, get to that why, get to that purpose, that intentionality that can then propel them and give them the courage and conviction to live life in a certain way. But the same way that leadership falls off the plate, people get so busy, so distracted, who knows what else, and they just forget that they are at the center of everything else that goes on around them.
You got it. Yeah, working on the work rather than working on themselves. And well, and I know, Noel, that you had a pivotal moment in 2018. I mean, when I asked you to tell me about a pivotal moment in your life, I wasn't surprised that it was about investment in leadership development. And it was you. It was you participating in this development program. And that really had an impact on you.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Andrew. And I appreciate having those thoughtful, deep conversations that which you and I have had. I'm human. So what I just described to you, guess what? It happened to me. I'm guilty, right? And I think the challenge there is that, my career is approaching 15 years almost, and you can almost cut it in half. And I could almost tell you that half of it was Noel, the technician, Noel, the manager. And not that I wasn't leading, certainly I was leading myself and protecting and building my reputation and living my values, but I wouldn't call it out because I didn't know that I was actually doing it. And I didn't feel that I understood the role that leadership was playing and how I was showing up. But the trajectory of my career, I would say, is one where I evolved from the work of technical and projects and checking off the boxes and just being very focused on the results and the performance that I could develop. And I would still work with others, but my locus wasn't about others. So over time, as I went from smaller communities to mid-sized communities, as I went from being in the chair to working as a number two, my role changed. And it all came full circle in 2018 when I attended the Senior Executive Institute while serving at the city of Capel. And Mike Land, that city manager, when he hired me, when he invited me to apply, he I knew what he stood for. I knew what that organization represented, and I knew what to expect in terms of the leadership first approach. And I had heard him at a conference speak once, and then we developed a relationship professionally and then personally. And he invested in me, and he told me, "Noel, we're reloading essentially." They were going through a succession plan of 10-year directors retiring. And he mentioned to me, "We're hiring you to kind of grow up with our assistant directors that will become directors and or any new directors that we hire." So he told me from the very beginning, and he said, "You're going to have directors here that have been in their roles for 20 years plus, but they've always been growing, right? They've never settled. Their leadership has always been growing despite their longevity." So I knew what I was going into. And then he sent me out to this institute for a couple of weeks. And it was very intensive, and it was very much focused on your leadership, what you needed to do for your organization, but also for yourself, your career, et cetera. And through the course of that time that I spent there, I reflected on my career, and I figured that the entire time, while I had made a difference in the smaller communities that I've been at, in the mid-sized communities, that as soon as I left, while there was still the remnants of the project that I did, right, the more tangible physical road improvement or facility or whatever the case, I didn't pour into the individuals in that organization where I was able to leave a part of me in terms of multiplying my leadership legacy so that they could continue that work forward, not just from a technical skill set, but from a principles and values system based perspective. It was like a watershed moment for me. A lot of things came full circle for me. And I figured that, in small towns, I was plucking the low hanging fruit. I gained a lot of experience and a lot of technical and management skills, but I wasn't necessarily opening up with my story of who I was. I wasn't providing the space for others to also find their why. And then for us to collectively align that for the purpose of a broader mission and vision and goals for the organization and for the community that could far outlast me, whether I was there or not, because those individuals could continue forward in whatever that mission was for the community and the organization. So yeah, that was a very pivotal time. I can point specifically to that leadership development program. I hadn't really been to an intensive program like that before. I had been to your 1 day, half day type conference sessions and things of the like, but I had not been to an intensive, very personalized experience the way I had there. I was not the same person when I left there. And I would just share real quick there that I think that's the intent of what we do, right? If we do it right, when you engage in leadership work, if you really immerse yourself in the right way, you should grow and there should be a change many times that happens.
Yeah, because you're really peeling back the layers and going deeper. I mean, having the level of awareness that you had, I mean, that took some thoughtfulness, that took some reflection, no doubt, to get you there. And it changed everything from you. I mean, in some sense, like, gosh, how grateful you must have been to have gotten that lesson at that point in your career, because then it really set you up. I mean, you had some experiences after that where you were really able to leverage that new insight that you had.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I learned and that I applied in my next community, which was the city of Brownsville, was that leadership work is reconcilable with day-to-day work, with project work, right? You can fit it all on your plate and integrate the way you do it. And in fact, it's even more powerful when you do it through a leadership approach, because what you're going to do is do it through others. We are limited in what we can do individually, but we can multiply our impact when we're able to enlist others in the vision, their skill sets, right? Their mindset, their ideas, their knowledge, their experiences for the same cause. And when you're able to build that ownership, that collective vision can be developed out of out of the gate. And then the work that you take on, right? The projects and the tasks and the strategy that you develop for the organization, that'll come, but it'll come through how you were able to create the environment to have others take part in that process. They're going to own it more. You're going to be walking shoulder to shoulder together, and it's no longer about you, it's about us. So now the power in us moving forward as one, that is the secret sauce, and that's what many times is fleeting. When I went to that community, Brownsville, there was a lot of work to be done. There were a ton of technical problems. There was, deferred maintenance, service level challenges, but there was also this tremendous optimism and desire to improve and to change because SpaceX had set up shop there. So there was this desire of how do we maybe not become a SpaceX, but how do we channel and funnel that energy of having the most innovative company in our backyard? How can that improve the way we show up as an organization and providing service to our community? How can we take that innovative lens in solving challenges and becoming the best that we can? And that's how the work was done. They had never taken steps to build a culture. They had a culture by default. So the topic of today is a culture by design, right? So every organization and environment has a culture. The question is it an intentional culture by design, or is it just by default, whatever it is, because no one has taken the time to define that vision, define the values, the mission, etc. So, and then letting that affect your strategy, your structure, your systems. Leadership work informs your management work, right? It informs everything else. So that culture certainly was a challenging one, as you can imagine, but it was reflected also in the challenges that they had. But what I am most proud of, and the legacy piece from my perspective, even though we built a new airport, even though we had a tremendous broadband initiative that was going to help solve their digital connectivity challenges as the fifth most disconnected community in the country. I mean, we did some pretty ambitious things, but in hindsight, and in this conversation, I'm not highlighting the projects. What I'm highlighting is those individuals that were awakened and who chose to go back to finish their degree, who came to us and wanted to take on stretch assignments, who wanted to lead projects, who applied for a promotional opportunity, and even some that left the organization because growth was going to mean that they had to leave. We began to outsource talent, and they began to lead to surrounding communities that were smaller and mid-sized because that was the best thing for them to grow. But it all began by that experiential environment that we created where we awakened, right, the leader in them. And that is what was driving what was being seen out in the community, right? All those projects, all that success, it was the people who had bought in, who we were investing in, and we were reaping the benefits of seeing high performance when you have higher engagement levels within the organization. All we were doing was not that this is a small thing, but we hired a great person that built a wonderful professional development program, very comprehensive, very tailored to the different levels of the organization. But we caught lightning in a bottle because our employees began to show up, and that discretionary effort, right? If you magnify that, we had 1,400 employees. That is what the community began to experience. Many folks didn't see it coming, but it was that tapping into that desire that we had to improve, to serve our community better. That is what was bubbling and what was being experienced. That was a transformation.
Yeah, and they hadn't had that before, right? They hadn't had that.
They had not.
Yeah, isn't it interesting just that little tweak, connecting the dots between why you do what you do and the bigger picture? I mean, just that little tweak. Tell us, like, what was happening within the organization to tap into that desire that they had to serve? What were some of the little things you all were doing to connect the dots for employees?
So what was happening was, so I came into, and it's interesting because Adams County's journey, which we'll talk a bit about here a little bit later, but they had a similar issue going on there that Adams County had over 10 years ago now. So I came into an ethical dilemma, right? So they were caught up in this ethical crisis where the organization was being painted in a negative light. So there was certainly some negative feelings of kind of shame that the organization was looking bad. publicly that public trust had been eroded a bit because of that situation. So that was one thing going on. Another thing that was going on was in that region, there are two major cities, and Brownsville is the largest city by population and other means. They weren't the wealthiest. They didn't reflect the biggest tax base, but there was a neighboring community that they kept being compared to that would get all the attention. That was the city on a hill in that region. So they were feeling like inferior to and like they were second place to this other community where Brownsville was the largest city and should have been regarded as the best. And I remember having the conversations, just like the Nissan commercial, where I would say that, well, bigger isn't better, right? Because we're bigger, because we have more population and all these assets, that doesn't guarantee success. We have to capitalize on those assets and earn our way to success. It's just not going to come by default. I also remember using the Dallas Cowboys analogy because we were in Texas, right? And there was a lot of Cowboy fans there. That Jerry Jones built them this amazing stadium, the first of the luxury stadiums that we now see more of, back in 2009. And I would ask him, what did that Jerry World Stadium get the Cowboys? How many championships have they had since 2009? And now, if you look at Frisco, Texas, they have the Star, this amazing training center. So they have the best, most immaculate facilities. How many Super Bowls do they have? So I said, does the facility play, or is it the players that have to earn the championship, right? They have a cultural issue. So we would talk about this. So what I came in and tapped into was, here's what I'm hearing, here's what I'm seeing, here's what you're telling me, from the governing body to community stakeholders to the employees themselves. What are we going to do about this? Right? We have the ability within what we can do together to change this, to commit to this vision, to become the best, to become the model. And I'm using words that they came up with now. It wasn't my words, it was their words. I just had the chance to play around and wordsmith them here and there. But the challenge was the mindset. What are we going to do differently? How are we going to invest in our leadership to begin to move forward? So those were some of the things that were going on behind the scenes. The employees got excited. And what happened was, we, the leadership of the organization, began to get involved in the leadership development programs. So the directors, the members of the city managers team, the inner circle, they had to be developed as well to understand what their roles were going to be. And hey, our responsibility is developing our employees. By developing our employees, that's going to be our recipe for success. So I also had to go through this gut check moment with my team: is, do I have individuals here who believe and who understand that their role is not just that title that they have, but it's getting more immersed, working with our what's called HR, or organizational development department, building this program, and then actually engaging and passing on our lessons, passing on our experiences, and helping develop the knowledge base of our employees, and creating the space for them to then work with us and partner with us on tackling the needs of the organization.
And that's when it's sustainable. You're talking about it as a system, the connectedness, the alignment across the organization. Seeing what you're doing now at Adams County, it's really fun to probe into, like, where you learned those things, since it is unique. So now then, fast forward a few years, and Adams County sought you out. So new opportunity, big move from Texas to Colorado, and great opportunity to really employ culture by design and leverage all of these learnings that you'd had in your career.
And the interesting part is that, every organization, even if you have a culture by design, it's in a different life cycle. So Adams County had its birth in 2010. And I came in and I asked our team members to put together this journey map. So the journey of our culture was put together, and I call it the bingo card, because all the different efforts and initiatives that have been done over the last 12 years now were put on this piece of paper so that I can better understand. Walk with me, take me back to 2010. What happened? Why did we commit to this culture? Why we are Adams? What does it mean? What was the process? Who were the influencers? So I began to ask a lot of questions. And that was important because I needed to understand the foundation right? What was the genesis of our culture here, and where do I begin to support the what's next for us? Because having the cultural discipline to continue to one thing is to build a culture, another thing is to sustain it, and then also to evolve it as needed. Because cultures are not static, and they do evolve. So for me, is I needed to understand what was needed for me to support the culture and where I could integrate my efforts with my role to ensure that we were able to go forward and continue to grow and evolve as a culture, as an organization. So when I came here, I remember at my very first all employee meeting, I never said we're going to come in here and do anything to change what's in place. I wanted to spend my first 100 days and be thoughtful and listen and learn. And I called it a culture recalibration because, if anything, as opposed to a wholesale culture implementation, which is what happened in my prior organization here, I needed to just maybe tweak and prune different areas. So there's not a lot that I didn't know whether I had to do a lot or a little. And I had to understand that because it's trickier when you come into an established, more mature organization, and that is, where do you insert yourself and how do you begin to add value and how do you begin to support where we need to go next? So very different context. I think what I've come to respect, seeing the culture, having been a part of a mature one, having started one from scratch and then coming into an existing one, for me, I believe it's trickier to come into an established one at this level and not do too much to disrupt it in ways that could be counterproductive. Because again, if it's working, why change it? And if it needs to be tweaked, we still have to be able to explain. I have to be able to work with the team to explain why those tweaks are necessary. Also, one thing I would mention there is we can't forget about going back to our employees. It's also not so much about what I think. This April, next month, or May, here in the next couple of months, we're about to go back out and do a roadshow with focus groups and have some very intensive engagement as we kind of audit our culture, right? So now we're more kind of auditing and making sure we're checking in and providing some cultural hygiene, right? That we're checking in on our culture and seeing if there are any gaps or things of that nature that I need to be lending my time in based on what our employee perspective is.
Yeah, and one of the things that I notice, your intentionality around engaging everyone. I'm not surprised to hear you say you started with listening and seeking to understand, because you needed to learn where they were before you did anything. And what I see you doing now, fast forward a bit, you engaging all of the stakeholder groups. So you've talked a lot about staff and recognizing where employees are and connecting the dots for them. But you're also, you're engaging the county commissioners, you're engaging your leadership team, you're engaging elected officials. So there's also something so powerful in the alignment across all of these stakeholder groups. This, like, the same leadership framework, right? The same language. Like, that has huge impact.
While yes, it's going to take a much more robust engagement with our employees to understand our culture, kind of the different layers of our culture as we take a look under the hood, so to speak. What I have realized, even at my level in the time that I've been here, is that there was a need for greater alignment with our governing body and our elected officials who are independent. And so I didn't have to wait to start to work in that area because I could see it from my level. And to me, in a public sector context, particularly here as a county, those are all the board understanding their role intimately and staying connected and how they support and reinforce is important. And the same thing with our elected officials because they have independent staffs that experience our culture in different ways that also have different unique needs. And we have to be able to capture that and incorporate that into our organization. It's the same way as every employee at different levels has different needs based on the level. Well, the same thing with our departments, right? So if you take it and apply that to our elected offices, when I engaged with them, I heard that our cultural work from the very beginning, in fact, still had missed elements that they felt were reflective of who they are and the services that they provide. So I said, what an opportunity to come in here and begin to close those gaps by engaging with them. So that's why we've started that. Yeah, I foresee that there'll be a whole uh, what is it? There'll be a whole set of additional things to work on within the organization. But whatever we've already been able to identify, that is something that, as we learn about it, we're going to begin to incorporate it into our process.
That's the evolution that you've talked about, right? It just keeps evolving. But you're providing space for leaders to talk about it and to think about the impact that they have. And that's such a key takeaway, is that any leader, regardless of sector, industry, level, everything you do, everything you say every single day is impacting the culture around you. Like, we are all helping to shape the culture of the organizations we're a part of. So what advice do you give to leaders that are listening to this? Like, what would you say would be a first step in being intentional about the culture that you're creating?
I was reading a John Maxwell post over the weekend on LinkedIn, and he was talking about don't wait until you are in a leadership position to start leading. Start leading now, right? And then you'll be able to take on greater levels of responsibility. And I think that, and this goes back to another leadership misunderstanding. Leaders can be developed. Leaders are not born. I think what I would suggest to individuals is begin to reflect on what leadership philosophies you hold to be true. What are the things that you currently perceive as being leadership or not? Because you can always learn from something. If you've had a more negative experience serving under a manager or a boss, you can actually learn from that. What can you learn? What not to do? How to be different. That if you ever have the privilege of having others under you, that you won't repeat the same, that you won't treat them the same, that you're going to take time to listen to them. And, you can become a student of leadership in any role at any point in your life. You can draw from leadership beyond just the workplace. I talked a bit about my upbringing. I still reflect today on things that I experienced growing up that I connect to leadership. And I think taking a leadership lens and applying it in every aspect of your life. I now have children. There's a whole set of leadership concepts and things that I'm experiencing now with them. So we always are influencing somebody, and somebody is always influencing us. Do we know who's influencing us? Do we know the forces? The music we listen to, the shows that we watch, the books that we read, the people that we meet, the people that we spend time with. There's just an array of these tentacles. I mean, we have five senses for a reason, I tell people, so that you can more fully experience life through all the five senses. And guess what? All those five senses can deceive you, and all those five senses will pull you in one way or another. I'm hungry. Let me go run and do this. Whatever the case. I saw that. Let me go see it again. We can be pulled. We're complex. But if you twist things and flip them on their head and have them work in your favor for your development, that's what I always tell folks. Start with beginning to understand the world around you and how you can engage with the world around you in a different way so that you can grow your influence and be able to use the world around you to your advantage.
Yeah, it's a growth mindset. I mean, you recognize that you can learn through any situation, any experience. So there's an openness to that. I mean, I so appreciate you saying that we are all students of leadership. And I think that when there's an openness to learning from the experiences, that's when the growth happens. When we're closed off, or we're victimy, or we're blamey, or it's their fault, or, oh gosh, you've just closed yourself off to all the growth and the potential that exists within the challenge.
And if you can, I mean, if wherever someone may find themselves, if you can influence the person next to you, for good, you're practicing leadership. Do that. Take advantage of that. Keep it simple. Leadership, unfortunately, sometimes we make it complex. We make it unattainable, and we associate it sometimes with things that are just not healthy. So I think that's one of the first things I would say to individuals, to just kind of focus deeply, reflect on what you're trying to accomplish, and then begin to take that action.
That's great. Yeah, it starts with you. I mean, it goes back to the leadership first, right? Investment in me. Like you gotta start there, learning about yourself before you can give to others. Noel, you are a model. You are modeling the way for creating culture by design. Thank you for highlighting for us today how you're doing that at Adams County, and even more importantly, like where that came from. Like even as a kid, the experiences you had have really led you to where you are today. So thank you for sharing your journey and your story. We are all better for it.
Thanks for having me, Andrea. And I would say, hire good consultants, work with partners that get it, because
You are a dream client because of your attitude. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what the best consultants do is they come alongside the leader helping to realize their vision. And that's all we're doing, right? It's you're doing the hard work. We're just helping to facilitate it. So thank you, my friend. If our listeners want to connect with you, Noel, what's the best place to do that?
I'm pretty light on social media, but the one thing I do is LinkedIn. I find so much value in it for professional reasons, and I can always be contacted there.
Yeah, and follow Adams County also, and just look at all the cool things they're doing. You'll see culture shine through as you follow them.
Oozing out, oozing.
Oozing out,
Yes.
oozing out. Awesome.
Thanks so much for your time, and I so enjoyed this conversation, Andrea.
Thank you, Noel. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast to never miss a Being at Work story.